Hi, this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and I'm going to be presenting a game from round 1 of the 2011 U.S. Championship between veteran Larry Christiansen and Alexander Shabalov. And Christiansen, I think he's about 54 years old, but he's still trucking. He won the U.S. Championship 3 times previously, and Shabalov has also won the U.S. Championship, I believe, 4 times previously. So these dudes are definitely some heavyweights. And Christiansen, LarryC, I guess I'll call him, he opens up with knight c3, which can lead to a couple, you can play a closed Sicilian with g3 and bishop g2. You can also play a Grand Prix attack with f4, or as in the game, it's just kind of a tricky move order to kind of throw your opponent off. He just transposes into normal lines with knight f3 and d4. And so Shabalov is playing the accelerated dragon. You don't see it too frequently at Grandmaster level, but you see it every once in a while. It's a very double-edged opening. Despite very thorough analysis, it's still it still hasn't been solved, as far as deep analysis goes. So still play. And bishop e3. This is called the Yugoslav attack that Christiansen is playing. Sometimes Black will play knight g4 here to trade. Now queen g4 is kind of forced. Queen takes and knight takes, and kind of exchange some pieces to make it a little easier for Black. But I don't know. It's kind of a copping out to trade pieces like that. And so yeah, bishop c4, and both sides are fighting for control of the center. Bishop c4, the point here is if White plays something like this, Black can play d5, and it really freezes game up, and Black equalizes most of the time pretty easily in that line. So that's why Larry plays bishop c4. And pretty much White, it's very common in the Yugoslav for White to play queen d2, f3, g4, and h5, and to attack along those lines. But in this game, Larry, and I'm not trying to disrespect him. I don't know, it's just easier to call him Larry than Christiansen. But he castles kingside here. Typically in this position, he goes kingside. The move bishop d7 and b5, this is something of a different plan, but I mean the idea is pretty similar. In the dragon, it typically goes opposite side castling, and it's kind of a race to see who gets to the king first. But LarryC goes kingside here, and this is a different line. Not quite so aggressive, but I'm sure this hasn't been analyzed so much, and he was probably trying to avoid any kind of preparation from Shabalov. And now the move a5. So we can kind of take stock here as far as what's going on. So White will most likely put the rooks in the center and push f4 and maybe e5, possibly pushing the g pawn up, but probably not, to keep the cover around his king. Meanwhile, Black has a minority attack on the queen side associated with a4, b4, something like that. And also Black might try to push for d5, but that's going to be tough. a3 by White, just if a4, now he can go back, bishop a2. Bishop c6. So now d5 is not quite gonna work. If for example, it doesn't quite work here, but it's bishop c6. It's somewhat hanging in the air. And now rook d1 makes sense. Develop your pieces, centralize the rooks, and get ready to really push forward. And queen f2. So now maneuvering is kind of started. We're out of the basic opening phase and definitely into the middle game. And after knight d7 is a good move. This bishop was definitely very active, so trading it off for that bishop on g7 makes sense. And if Black can trade the bishops and play queen b6 to trade queens, he's going to have a very comfortable position. The opening with the kingside castling chosen by LarryC is definitely not too aggressive. It's more of a positional maneuvering type. And so knight e2 is a good move. Wants to reroute the knight to d4. It's definitely going to be better placed on d4 than c3. Bishop c6, go ahead and get that bishop out the way. And now Christiansen trades the pieces, introduces a little threat to the b5 pawn, which is actually not so easy to defend. So the most common move, I guess he was setting a little trap here, was queen b6. I mean, that's the obvious move, which is what was played in the game. But let's look at the alternatives. I mean, bishop a6 seems like an okay idea, but it does allow white. It stops exerting pressure on the center. B4 was a possibility. However, that pawn is gonna be kind of weak on B4, so it's kind of tough. It's gonna be weak on B4, so it's kind of tough. So looking at the natural move, Queen B6, and now LarryC busts out a very nice shot, E5. So Queen F2 and Knight D4 was a very subtle plan, trying to pinpoint that B5, and now E5. And the idea is, obviously, Knight takes E5 isn't going to work because of check, takes, and white just picks up the queen. Not going to work there. Pawn takes, and this was really the point. Now I believe Larry was intending Knight E6. And the queen obviously can't take because the bishop is supporting the knight. So after pawn takes, rook takes D7, and let's say takes, and probably want to play rook takes here because of this pin, and maybe E4 for black. And in this position, white sacked a pawn, but black has tripled pawns in the center, and there's no way they're not going to stay. I mean, not to mention he's threatening the bishop on B7, so he's immediately just going to win a pawn from that, and most likely the game. So E5 is a great idea. And now D5. So now black has a bad bishop on B7. It's closed in by these pawns on the same color, and white's always going to be attacking it. And in exchange, white has gained space with the move E5. His pawns are on dark squares, which complement the light squared bishop very well. So E6. I'm sure the first thing he considered was E6 here, but it doesn't seem to quite work. So the move F4. King H1, it's always nice to have time for the subtleties. Good prophylactic move, getting the king out of any checks, anything on that diagonal. And now bishop A6. So I guess Shabalov is kind of wishing he should have played that earlier instead of queen B6. But anyways, preparing the move B4, and so Shabalov, kind of forces rook E1 here. And knight C5. Good moves, got to activate. Rook E3, getting ready to, rook lifts are always nice. H3, making some luft for the king. He can come up, maybe preparing G4 as well. And C3. So now he's trying to reroute the bishop. And knight E4, queen E1. So you want the queen to be able to come to the king side. And also it's going to be kind of preventing that B4 advance for the moment, it seems. So queen E1 is a good move. And now black is really revving up that minority attack with B4 coming to wreck those pawns on white's queen side, maybe creating a protected pass pawn on D5. And now bishop C2. And so black sacrificed a pawn here to open up this bishop on B7, which definitely makes sense. And I didn't really see another alternative. So let's see here. Just hit a wrong button. So going back, yeah. So here's where we stopped. B4 by LarryC. And the idea is just to stop black from playing B4 himself and opening up this bishop, as well as attacking that C3 pawn. So at first, you don't think B4 is really the best move because of that weakness, that backward pawn on C3 now. But it stops black from playing B4 himself, and this pawn is going to be essentially a permanent weakness for black. And so you never want to have pawns in the same color as your bishop. Queen G3, a good move, threatening F5, and knight takes F5. So, and king H8 to get out of that, and now knight B3 to kind of put the question to this pawn. Is it going to take, or is it going to go forward? And also rerouting to C5, which is going to control the D7 square as well. So rook D6, just gaining space. Rook C7 to kind of regroup and defend. And now the knight back to D4 to attack, put pressure on that B5 pawn. And now Shabalov's down to 3.5 minutes. LarryC's got about 8, so it's getting into crunch time. Notice how Larry does not take the E4 pawn, which would open up black's bishop, and he just lets it sit there. there's no rush to take it. That pawn's going to be weak forever. So finally takes it under good circumstances. And now Shabalov's down about 3 minutes, and he just used about 2.5 on this move. So he's trying to introduce some threats. Being down a pawn this endgame is definitely not going to be good for him, especially with that bishop, this weakness on b5 and a bad bishop. Very strong knight for white. Probably almost winning now for white. And so queen g3 to defend against the mate, and Shabalov is very low on time. Queen g5, he's starting to penetrate. Maybe he's going to bring the rook to the d file possibly, or possibly the a file. It's going to try to penetrate somehow. And so rook c8 to defend. And after rook g3, possibly he wants to defend this. Wants to defend the g-pawn from mate with rook g3, and also probably thinking about starting to march some pawns up against black's king. And now h6, and this was just, I think Shabalov was really low on time and just a miscalculation. h6, rook takes c3, so obviously if rook takes, queen takes g2 mate, so that was the idea with h6. And I don't know, h6 was a blunder, and now knight takes e6, and Shabalov resigned. Knight takes e6, a great tactical shot, and the idea is very simple. If obviously pawn takes, this is going to lead to mate, so that's not going to work. And if queen takes, simply take the rook, and this is extremely easy to win, up 2 pawns in the exchange. So knight takes e6, and obviously it's threatening mate on g7. So a fantastic game by Christiansen, and he's come out very strong in the second group with 2-0 in the first 2 rounds. So great game by Larry, and this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and thanks for tuning in.